morning, and thank you for joining me for our identification. Good morning, and thank you for joining me for Identification, Prevention, Recovery website. Good morning. Thank you for joining me for Identification, Prevention, Recovery, a dropout webinar that will cover all things dropout throughout this 2016-2017 school year. My name is Lauren McKinney, and I serve as your regional dropout consultant here at the Region 10 Education Service Center. So, just a quick overview as to what identification, prevention, and recovery is. It is a monthly webinar held from 8 a.m. to 9:30 a.m., and it provides tips, tools, and strategies to help students succeed in school and life. I.P.R is free for all participants, and we encourage you to invite your friends and colleagues to join the discussion. Continuing professional education hours are available and can be obtained by enrolling in the topics accompanying the courses in the Online Learning Center. So our topic for today is who, what, and why. I want to start off by highlighting the National Dropout Prevention Center Network. Their mission is to increase graduation rates through research and evidence-based solutions. They intend to reduce America's dropout rate by meeting the needs of youth in at-risk situations, including students with disabilities. They also intend to improve opportunities for all young people to fully develop the academic, social, work, and healthy life skills needed to graduate from high school and lead productive lives. Through their research, they have established what are known as 15 effective strategies that have the most positive impact on high school graduation rates. So I wanted to highlight these with you. They are broken down into 4 quadrants. The first, which is considered foundational strategies. The second quadrant are early interventions. The third, basic core strategies. And the fourth, managing and improving instruction. So let's drill a little further into these now that we know the overarching themes. Under foundational strategies, they have found in their research that it is very important that we have a systemic approach, school community collaboration, and safe learning environments. These are just core base tenet foundation strategies that will help our students as well as our stakeholders and community members and educators who are trying to meet the needs of this very specific and unique population. So under a systemic approach, to summarize, it's basically the regular evaluation of the goals, systems, procedures, and policies to meet the needs of the diverse populations being served. Under school community collaboration, it is a collective support and collaboration that aids in the creation of a strong school infrastructure. And under safe learning environments, it is a positive school or social attitude and experience for students in the school that is based on a comprehensive violence prevention plan. So in short, we are trying to make sure that we are creating an environment as conducive to learning as possible, giving the access to schools that we have nowadays. Under early interventions, these are the 3 components or tenets under this section. Family engagement being the highlight or main one, followed by early childhood education, and then early literacy development. The reason why I emphasize family engagement is because we know just through research that family engagement really is one of the highest single predictors of student success in school just in general. So while the National Dropout Prevention Center Network does not say that family engagement is more important in early intervention stages than any of the other 2 that are here, I do like to put an emphasis on family engagement. Early childhood education. Under this, a summarization of it, it's basically providing the best possible education from the onset of their educational experiences. So that is prior to coming to school, that is in that pre-K through first level when they're first getting access. As any time they're beginning access to educational experiences, we need to set them up to be as strenuous, I guess, and I guess strenuous not in a bad connotation, but more as rigorous and foundation building as possible. And that's from your Head Start, early Head Start, any access they have when we're talking education. And then early literacy development. The improvement of reading and writing skills is a foundation, and a lot of research says the base foundation of effective learning. Without the ability to read and write effectively and communicate effectively, it does drastically impact a student's overall success. Basic core strategies when we're talking dropout and prevention: mentoring and tutoring. So creating a supportive, trust-based relationship that is individualized. So that can take it can look a variety of ways. It can be a formal mentoring program when we're talking about, say, our Big Brothers Big Sisters program, just to highlight one, or it could be less formal, but it's really contingent in the core pieces is that it is a supportive environment and trust is established and individual needs are met and individual needs are taken into account when we're talking everything from learning style, learning modality, because tutoring is here, or we're talking about just overall relationship building so that I have a desire and a reason to want to stay in school. Service learning. This is a connection of community service with academics. It does promote growth across a variety of areas, and that includes your social interactions, your overall career aspirations, and other domains. Alternative schooling. These programs that lead to a diploma through an alternate route, and they pay close attention to social needs as well as the academic requirements. And then after school / out of school opportunities. These are engaging experiences that fill the after school gap time. So basically making sure that our students have something productive and engaging to do that will minimize the likelihood or opportunity for them to get involved or engaged in non-desirable practices. And managing and improving instruction, the last core tenet or area that they cover in their 15 effective strategies. Professional development. The professional development, we're supposed to create a supportive environment where educators can learn strategies that work with this specific population. Because with dropout, this is not these are not strategies, even though they sound very, empowering to all students. Yes, these are great practices for all, but as we start to dig deeper in upcoming webinars and upcoming discussions, you'll see that even though these are really good strategies for all students, there are some that are specific to a dropout student or a potential dropout student that we want to make sure that we highlight. Active learning. We want to create an environment that is engaging and involves students in creative ways focused on the different ways that they learn. Educational technology. This is a technological era, utilizing technology that assists with differentiation of learning in an authentic way. And authentic also taking into account the various modalities and intelligences that we have. Individualized instruction, a flexible teaching style, employs motivation strategies to meet the individual needs of the students. And then lastly, career and technical education. And that is a quality program that assists students to be prepared for the unique and specific domains or demands of today's workplace. Because as we know, the environment that is required for us to operate in now is completely different from the environment that we had in yesteryear. So those were the 15 overall effective strategies pointed out by the National Dropout. And I just wanted to make sure that we had that as a good base so that we understand these are where some of these pieces are coming from. So now let's get deep into our topic for today. Who is considered a dropout and who are at risk? I like this quote because to me it really shows that dropout is not a singular event. It's not I wake up one day and decide that school, isn't for me and I'm not going back tomorrow per se. Dropping out is a process that begins well before high school, and students exhibit identifiable warning signs at least 1 to 3 years before they drop out. So who is considered a dropout? Well, this is a direct quote. I wanted to make sure that I did not misquote it in any way. It says, a dropout is a student who is enrolled in grades 7 through 12, does not return to public school the following fall, is not expelled, and does not graduate, receive a general educational development, continue school outside the public school system, begin college, or die. TEA has been reporting annual and longitudinal dropout and completion rates using this definition for 5 years. So one of the reasons why I included this in here is because it is important for us to know what definition we fall under in the state of Texas, because federally there is a slightly different definition than of dropout and the factors involved and indicators than what we prescribe to at the state level. Districts actually began submitting information under this more rigorous definition of dropout and procedures during the 2005-2006 school year. It is kind of important to know that the agency, the Texas Education Agency, uses the National Governors Association, a 4-year on-time graduation rate to calculate graduation rates, and uses the NCES, which is the definition we just read, dropout definition to count dropouts when calculating dropout rates and graduation rates. So we do kind of go off of two definitions here in the state, but in the NCES definition, which we just read and we're still looking at now, is the definition that the agency uses to calculate the actual dropout rates and graduation rates in the state of Texas. According to the National Center on Secondary Education and Transition, there are two actual kind of categories or factors that you can prescribe or take into account when we're talking dropout. They have what they consider to be variables associated, statute variables associated with dropout, and then alterable variables associated with dropout. So for example, age, gender, socioeconomic background, ethnicity, native language, your region, mobility, ability, disability, parental employment, school size and type, as well as your family structure. These are things that aren't as alterable. They're not as easily overcome as some of what they consider to be alterable variables. And an alterable variable associated with dropout are your grades. That is something that I can change. Disruptive behavior, that is within my control. Absenteeism, the school policies, meaning am I actually following them? School climate, as a student, do I feel comfortable there? If the climate is not one that, feels most conducive to me coming and feeling accepted, that is something that the school can in turn change, just like the school can choose to change or regularly update their school policies. Parenting, that sense of belonging, my attitude towards the school, the educational support I have in the home. These are all alterable things. It may be that initially I may feel as though I'm not getting as much support because maybe it's an area that my parents have capacity to improve on, areas that they want to grow themselves. And so until we kind of work this out as far as parent, what can I help you with? And student, this is what I need help with, and how can you help me be better? These are things that can be alterable over time. Also, retention. And lastly, stressful life events. These are alterable variables that are associated with factors or reasons as to why some of our students drop out. Now, according to the agency, we have 13 at-risk factors. So I wanted to cover these with you too, because this is also part of how who is actually identified as being a potential at-risk person, the possible indicators as to why a student may drop out. So when we're talking about the who component of dropout, a student at risk of dropping out of school includes each student who is under 21 years of age and who, one, is either in pre-kindergarten, kindergarten, or grades 1, 2, or 3 and did not perform satisfactorily on a readiness test or assessment instrument administered during the current school year. So this is part of the reason why we say that dropout ideology, the thoughts, that feelings as to whether or not I am a successful student or if I can become a successful student begins in elementary. Pre-K, kinder, 1, 2, and 3. The research shows if I am not performing satisfactorily on the readiness test, so we're talking STAR, we're talking depending on your district and where you're located, ITBS, we're talking standardized assessments. If I am not doing performing at that base satisfactorily minimal level, that's basically saying I'm at risk for dropping out later. The second indicator, I'm in grades 7 through 12 and did not maintain an average equivalent to 70 on a scale of 100 in 2 or more subjects in the foundational curriculum during a semester in that preceding or current school year. Again, when we're talking foundational curriculum, think back to your reading and writing for sure, and then also your math. Indicator 3, I was not advanced from one grade level to the next for 1 or more school years. So this is, we're talking, retention. What did I fail to be promoted from one school year to the next? Did I not perform satisfactorily on an assessment instrument administered to the students under our Texas education law, and who has not in the previous or current school year subsequently performed in that or on that instrument or another appropriate instrument at a level equal to or at least 100% of that level? So basically, yet again, it's saying I'm not performing satisfactorily. I'm not meeting that minimal level. These are the top 4, or first 4, let me not say top, the first 4 indicators that a student may be at risk for possibly dropping out. 5 through 8, is pregnant or is a parent. Now, not too long ago, I actually got a call about this, asking whether or not a student who is the male can be considered at risk or would be coded as at risk since they are not the one carrying the child. So I want to know your thoughts. Tell me, what do you think? Is the male parent in this situation still considered possible for being at risk, even though they're not the mother? Yes, thank you very much. You guys are giving me some awesome feedback, and it's yeah, they are can be considered at risk because according to the law, they are a parent, even if they're not the one that's carrying the child. So even though there may not be, the female, they are a parent, and that within itself can be considered an at-risk indicator due to the other stresses and factors that come along with being a parent. So let's keep going. Number 6 says a student could possibly be considered at risk if they have been placed in an alternative education program during that year or the preceding or previous school year. Number 7, they have been expelled and during that year or the previous school year. Number 8, they're currently on parole, probation, deferred prosecution, or other conditional release. Number 9, they were previously reported as have dropped out of school. 10, they're a student of limited English proficiency. Number 11, they are in the custody or care of the Department of Protective and Regulatory Services and has during that school year been referred to that department by a school official, officer, or juvenile court. Number 12, homeless. If a child is homeless, and it's known as a homeless children or youth, and that's a separate term with separate definitions for it. That is one of the 13 at-risk factors identified in our state as a possible indicator or factor as to why a child or a student may drop out. And 13, resided in the preceding school year or resides in the current school year in a residential placement facility in the district, including a detention facility, substance abuse treatment facility, emergency shelter, a psychiatric hospital, halfway house, or foster group home. So these are the 13 identified at-risk indicators or at-risk factors. I do want to make sure that we take a moment to note that a student with a disability may be considered at risk of dropping out of school if the student meets one or more of the criteria that we just went over for being in an at-risk situation that is not considered to be part of the student's disability. A student with a disability is not automatically coded as being in an at-risk situation, so please be aware of that. However, districts should use the student's IEP, their individualized education program, and other appropriate information to make the determination if that student is possibly at risk. Any questions about at-risk factors or indicators before we move on? And I just want to make sure that we're good with this because it is the foundation of a lot of what we hear in educational terms, jargon, speech when we're saying at risk. These are the factors or indicators that are established and accepted in our state as what's considered possible factors or indicators of being at risk and at risk for dropping out and other things as well. Great question. I just got a question in regards to whether or not these at-risk indicators impact PIMS, which in our state of Texas is the Public Education Information Management System. So basically that's kind of how we track everybody in the state. That's how we track our students, make sure that they are coded appropriately for funding purposes, for documentation purposes, or a variety of reasons as to why we hold on to this information. But yes, part of our students that are at risk for dropping out are coded in our PIMS system as such. Okay, let's keep going. If you have any more questions for me, make sure you pop up a hand or send me a chat question and we will answer it as we keep moving along here this morning. So to continue on, who drops out? Johns Hopkins School of Education has a plethora of information. And in fact, we will be hearing from one of the deputy directors in a few moments. But according to the research, approximately 15% of the nation's high schools produce more than half of its dropouts and close to 75% of its minority dropouts. That is staggering. To think that only 15% of all of the schools in our country produced half of our national dropout rate is unbelievable. And then on top of that, 75% of all of our minority dropouts come from this 15% of the campuses that we have in our nation. Wow. Let's delve into this a little bit more. Nearly half of our nation's African-American students and nearly 40% of our Latino students and only 11% of our white students attend high schools in which graduation is not the norm. A little longitudinal data here. Between 93 and 2002, the number of high schools with the lowest levels of success in promoting freshmen to senior status on time increased by 75%. as compared with only an 8% increase in the total number of high schools. Currently, we have between 900 and 1,000 high schools in the country in which graduating is at best a 50-50 proposition. In 2,000 high schools, a typical freshman class shrinks by 40% or more by the time the students reach their senior year. This represents nearly 1 in 5 regular or vocational high schools in the U.S. that enroll 300 or more students. So we have to ask ourselves, where are these students going? Where are they? If a high school class, a typical freshman class, decreases by 40% by the time they become seniors, so less than 4 years later, what happened to that 60%? A majority minority high school is 5 times more likely to have weak promoting power, which means they promote 50% or fewer freshmen to senior status on time, than a majority white school. Poverty appears to be the key correlate of high schools with weak promoting power. Majority minority high schools with more resources successfully promote students to senior status at the same rate as the majority of white schools. The majority of high schools with weak promoting power are located in northern and western cities and throughout the southern states. And at both the national and state levels, troubling graduation gaps remain between white students and their Black and Latino peers, low income and non-low income students, and students with and without disabilities. At the state level, Iowa became the first state to surpass 90% with a 90.5% rate in 2014. 20 other states are on pace to reach a 90% graduation rate. 5 on-pace states, Nebraska, New Jersey, New Hampshire, Texas, and Wisconsin, are within 2 percentage points of the goal. And 21 states are currently off track to reach 90% by the class of 2020. So what this is referring to is this 90% basically rule or ideal or goal is the concept that we will have 90% of all of our students across the nation graduating by the class of 2020. That is the goal. That's the mission, the initiative that is put out there from a variety of sources. But this is the goal nationally, is for us to hit a graduation rate of 90% by the class of 2020. Couple more things. Many cities have high concentrations of high schools with weak promoting power, and half of the nation's nearly 100 largest cities, 50% or more of high school students who attend regular or vocational high schools with more than 300 students attend high schools with weak promoting power. In some cities, students have virtually no other choice but to attend a high school with weak promoting power. And I know this phrase keeps occurring, weak promoting power, over and over, and it comes from a variety of reasons as to why a campus can be considered as having weak promoting power. And what that means is, are we actually successfully preparing students so that they can successfully transition and promote to the next grade levels, and ideally out of high school and on to post-secondary education or career. Vulnerable students are overrepresented in low graduation rate high schools. And of that, roughly 924,000 in large low graduation rate high schools, 65% were from low income families and 63% were Black or Hispanic or Latino. Vulnerable students, the way they define them, are students who could fall under the at-risk factors, one of which also including socioeconomic status, which I know we kind of hit on. There are 1,000 large low graduation rate high schools. So I showed you this information already. Some of the data just kind of repeats itself a little bit, but I did want to make sure that, I pointed it out again, because these are pieces that we have to ask ourselves, like, wow, looking at this again, wow. Nationwide, 33% of all non-graduates in 2014 were enrolled in low graduation rate high schools. Though alternative, charter, and virtual schools collectively account for about 14% of high schools and 8% of high school students, these educational options make up 52% of the low graduation rate high schools nationwide, and they produce 20% of non-graduates. Regular district high schools account for about 41% of low graduation rate high schools. So those are the who. We know, just to summarize quickly, that we have a very small percentage of high schools in the state, across our nation, that account for over 50% of the dropouts that we have. And of that 15% that actually have all of the students that we're talking about here with these low promotion power high schools, 75% of them we know are minorities. We also know, just looking at this data here that we just reviewed, that it is an involved process. There's not one specific reason as to why our students are dropping out, but we do have a little bit of a greater understanding of the who. Now, this research can go on and on and on, and we could talk about the who for 3 hours within itself. So I did not want to do that. I wanted to make sure for time purposes that I grabbed the data that I thought was the most representative and succinct, that actually would summarize in general the who when we're talking about our dropouts. So now let's go into what. So what are some of the factors that actually put youth at risk for dropping out, since we've already covered the 13 at-risk indicators? Shirley Wells did some research back and published this research back in 1990. And even though this is a little old when we're considering how often and how recent we like for our sources to be, she actually put quite a bit in motion as far as opening the conversation and having a greater understanding of possible factors. So the article that she released, the title was At-Risk Youth, Identification, Programs, and Recommendations. She found that there are 4 components when we're talking our students that are at risk and why they drop out. She says these components or factors are school-related, student-related, community-related, and family-related. It is important to note that while any one factor or even several factors could play a role, it does not necessarily place students at risk. It's combinations of circumstances that identify the potential to drop out. It's not saying that because I'm having school-related challenges, it's combinations of factors and circumstances that kind of pile on and add to this dropout rhetoric or this desire to drop out because of a combination of a series of factors. Let's go into these factors a little more. School-related factors. Conflict between the home and school culture. We talk about the importance of climate and culture a lot, but we really do have to pay closer attention and gain a greater understanding as to what that really means between what your home culture is and your school culture. Are they on the same page? If they're not, what can we do as the school to make sure that we're meeting home culture where it is, and together we are growing to form a unified and solid climate as to what school is going to look like for us. An effective discipline system, a lack of adequate counseling, if there's a negative school climate, a lack of relevant curriculum, passive instructional strategies where I just sit and get, inappropriate use of technology. It's not enough just to say we all have a 1-to-1 ratio with technology or we all have, tablets. It's how am I using this to further my education? A disregard of student learning styles, low expectations from retaining a lot of students or suspending them, and then the lack of language instruction. And this delves a little bit more into one of the at-risk factors we looked at earlier of second language learners, that second language learner acquisition. Student-related factors. If there's a poor school attitude, if there is a low ability level, I may find it within me to say, you know what, I'm not good at school, so why am I continuing to go? If there's attendance or truancy challenge, if there are behavior or discipline problems, pregnancy, drug abuse or other substance abuse, poor peer relationships. We know school is learning is a social experience, according to John Dewey and other educational advocates. And we know that our students view learning as a social experience. So if my peer relationships aren't strong, there goes some of my motivation for actually going to school. Non-participation. My friends are gone already. They decided to drop out. If there's an illness or a disability, or if I have low self-esteem and my self-efficacy skills aren't quite there yet. These are all student-related factors. Let's get into community. If there's a lack of community support, services, or response, if there is a lack of community support for the schools, if there are high incidences of criminal activities within the community, and if there is a lack of school and community linkages. That goes back to the at-risk factors again. Just if we are not forming those relationships within the community, and this also comes from the National Dropout Network's 15 effective strategies that we started off our time together with. If there's not a community bond, if there's not a community collaboration, it does have a negative impact on our students, and it does impact or can possibly become a factor as to why dropout occurs. And then lastly, family-related factors. Low socioeconomic status plays a role. Having a dysfunctional home life, if there's no parental involvement, if there's low parental expectations, if we are coming from a non-English speaking home, or if I have an ineffective parent, or I'm in an abusive home, or if we have high mobility. These are all family-related factors. And it's important to note as well that predictors of dropping out of school, they have appeared to stabilize over time. So basically, the factors that we find are pretty much the same factors that continue to be prevalent. A study of 2 samples of dropouts, and this study research was done back in the mid-1970s as well as the 1980s, described the general picture of potential dropouts, meaning a potential dropout tended to be retained in that same grade. They have poor academic grades, and they feel disengaged from the school. They are more likely to come from low socioeconomic status families where parents did not get very far in their own schooling, and these students tend to be part of a large peer group. They also tend to be involved in more passive activities, to adhere more frequently to the deviant norms, to manifest behavior problems, and to be arrested more frequently by the police, and to exhibit psychological vulnerability. I want to show you a quick video clip from our May 19, 2016 virtual dropout conference that we hosted here through Region 10. This was from our keynote speaker, Joanna Fox, who is out of Johns Hopkins University School of Education.
On kind of 3 predictors, I would say, and their attendance, behavior, and sports credit. Because when students aren't engaged, when they don't have relationships, when they don't know why they're doing what they're doing or expected to do, what happens? They stop coming to school, their credits drop, their grades drop, and they act out. And so in this way of thinking about it, what we're thinking is that all of this tells us, those are the signs that tell us most easily when particular kids have lost interest. And I can lead you to thinking, what are we going to do with the schools? How are we going to make our courses more interesting? How are we going to motivate these kids? What can we do as adults? Because we don't want to pick factors like low socioeconomic status, their parents' education. Those are things we can't do anything about. But we can do, okay, they're not interested. How can we improve our instruction? How can we make our school more hospitable? And just to kind of give you the mantra that we work on, when kids attend less than 90% of the time, that's not a very good predictor of what's going to happen in the future for graduation. If they have a suspension and or lots of little infractions, not a good sign for the future. And interestingly, when we look back to the longitudinal database I mentioned, math and English success or failure, starting in about 6th grade, becomes the big predictor of what's going to happen to a student and are they going to graduate. So if you can do something about any of these things, which you can, then you can get them back on track. Just as another set of indicators, on track means better than 90% graduation. And college-ready students, we started to look at the kids who go to college and persist in college, and that's for a year or two. There are databases that allow you to connect that. Well, students who get to it in college typically have 95% or better attendance. They don't have any behavioral infractions. And they're either passing math in ELA or they're getting a C in MERIT. These are really kind of the indicator of absolutely college ready. So we want to make sure those are earned support, not handed out.
Okay, that's all I wanted to show you from this one. And let's head on back to our session here. So what Joanna just went over were additional factors as to how and what, and really kind of going into a little bit of the why as to our students who are in dropout and those students who are contemplating dropout, those who have already dropped out, and those who are possibly considering coming back. Any questions about anything that we've covered so far? Because we're moving at a pretty good clip. I want to make sure that I stay respectful of the time that you all are investing with me today. So we've already covered the who, we've already covered the what. But before I go into the why, do we have any questions? Thank you for that question. Yes, the question was in regards to the 2016 virtual dropout conference that we had back on May 19th. And is there a way to get access to that entire session? And it is. If you visit our dropout site, which is region10.org/dropout, you will find at the bottom of the page a link to a separate Google site that I created that houses all of the sessions, AM, PM, breakout sessions, as well as the keynote that we had for the 2016 Virtual Dropout Conference. And the strands, we covered about 5 separate strands. And once you go in there and have a look, and peruse the site, you can watch any of the videos at your leisure. Has some really good information from a variety of sources. I do highly recommend you checking that out if you're trying to get some more information about dropout, if you're just starting this walk and you're wanting to know a little bit more as to what it encompasses and what I can do immediately to help my students that I serve. Thank you for that. Okay, let's keep going. So why? Why does dropout occur? And what are factors? Research indicates that the chances of a student dropping out greatly increases when a student has poor grades, which we've already talked about, in core subjects, as well as has low attendance and fails to be promoted to the next grade or has behavioral challenges. So ETS released a study, basically, in a summation of all of the research that they had been doing a couple of years ago. And in it, they identified factors associated with dropping out of high school. Now, you'll notice that I've been talking about high school quite a bit throughout this because the vast majority of dropouts do occur at the high school level. Interestingly enough, though, it actually starts about freshman, sophomore year, which is why, as we've already noted looking at the data, there is only a 40% graduation rate of that initial freshman class by the time they get to their senior years, because it's usually, according to the research, around in the freshman, sophomore year, wherein our students make that decision to drop out of school. Even though the seed is planted early on, as we know from looking at the other research in regards to their success in foundational or core curriculum, meaning reading, writing, starts at an elementary level. Okay. It's also important that I point out here that a disproportionate number of dropouts are economically disadvantaged. They come from non-English speaking backgrounds, they're African American or Hispanic, and our male students have a higher dropout rate than our female students by far. Okay. So now let's go into a little bit about the factors that we have listed here. So students that are at risk for dropping out display certain easily identifiable characteristics, some of which are demographic and others that are related to their overall performance in schools. And other predictors of dropping out of high school may be characterized as psychosocial factors or factors related to personality and motivation. So looking at the demographic characteristics, some of the factors, they come from a low-income family and there's a lack of credits earned. Male, they're members of racial or ethnic minority groups, and then they're older than the average student in their grade. Performance standards, again, the lack of credits earned. poor attendance, poor grades. Self-identified factors about their self. The classes aren't interesting. There's a lack of engagement with the school. And that can be, of course, outside of the academic portion. There's a lack of engagement, period. I may not be vested in the school. Maybe I'm not a part of a after-school program, such as like the chess club or the debate club or sport. Other self-identified factors, the tests are too difficult and poor attendance. Self-identified factors about others. Adults do not expect them to perform in school. Parents are not involved, and teachers do not seem interested in school. So I want to point out a couple of other theories or factors as to why this occurs, why dropout occurs. ETS has begun some research on the theory of planned behavior. And this is, I'm going to read it verbatim, a psychological theory that includes the role of attitudes. It holds promise in predicting dropout. Briefly, the theory says that intentions are the best predictor of behavior and that intentions are predicted by their attitudes. So meaning a person's evaluation of his or her own behavior or of others' behaviors. Subjective norms, which refers to the social pressure one feels to perform the behavior. And lastly, perceived control, meaning a person's perception of his or her own capability to perform the behavior. So this can even go back to the feelings of self-efficacy that we mentioned earlier as other factors as to why dropout occurs. If I'm not feeling as though I'm capable, if I don't feel as though I can tackle this challenge, if I don't feel as though I can be successful, that perceived control under the theory of planned behavior is one of the reasons as to why, or factors as to why students drop out. That is a very eye-opening piece, because even though we know that it's very important that a person feels confident in their skill set, that a person feels as though they are bringing things to the table. When we're talking, psychology, Maslow and his hierarchy, and plenty of others who developed ideologies or philosophies based on the concept of, do I feel as though I'm wanted, I'm a part of a greater good? Do I feel as though I myself am capable of achieving wonderful things? Under this theory of planned behavior, if I do not feel that, it directly impacts my motivation, my desire, my interest in school and wanting to come back. So whether it is social ties that are kicked in there because I am wanting to see my friends, or if it's because of academics where I feel I can overcome this challenge, I can do it, or if it's relationships with a specific teacher or teachers, the reason why I'm coming to school, whatever it is, we have to find out what it is for our students and make sure that we're continuing to provide that, because that is an entry, that's a base level. This is something that I can then build on to make sure that, or try to lessen or minimize the likelihood that a student will choose not to return. This next bit of information comes from research that you see here on the screen. The name of the study was Understanding Why Students Drop Out of High School According to Their Own Reports. Are they pushed or pulled? Or do they fall out? This was a comparative analysis of 7 nationally representative studies, and this was released back in November of 2013. That's when it was initially published. This concept of push, pull, or fall out is very interesting. I wanted to make sure that we had this information as part of the dialogue and discussion as to what dropout is, what it looks like, and why it in fact occurs. So, when you are pushed, a student is pushed out when adverse situations within the school environment lead to consequences, ultimately resulting in dropout. These include tests, attendance, and discipline policies, and even consequences of poor behavior. So I feel pushed out because of things that are going on basically, at the school. Pulled Students can be pulled out when factors inside the student divert them from completing school. These occur when factors such as financial worries, out-of-school employment, family needs, or even family changes such as marriage or childbirth pull students away from school. They can even include illnesses, as these cause students to put a greater value on something outside of school, and therefore they do not complete school. This definitely relates back to the 13 at-risk factors that we looked at the start of this time together, that pregnancy piece. Even if I am not the person that is pregnant, let's say I'm the young man in this situation, I can still feel pulled out of school and wanting to drop out because of financial concerns, family needs. Now, fallout occurs when a student does not show significant academic progress in schoolwork and becomes apathetic or even disillusioned with school completion. It is not necessarily an active decision, but rather a side effect of insufficient personal and educational support. Also, more than push or pull factors, falling out factors highlight a process in school dropout whereby the student gradually increases in behaviors or desires of academic disengagement, yet without being forced out by the school or lured out by the things that they need or want. As a result, these students eventually disappear or fall out from the system. I want you to think about our students who are second language learners, or our students who are just struggling academically, be it because of a identified disability or just I'm struggling. I'm struggling in general with reading, perhaps something that we know was an onset back in pre-K and kinder. The fallout of dropout is gradually. It's not an overnight thing, as we noted here. So I want to kind of highlight the difference between these. With push factors, the school is the agent whereby a student is removed from school as a result of a consequence. So with a push factor, the school in essence pushed the student out. Now it could be as a result of their behaviors, that could be one of the factors, but with a push factor, the school is the agent. With pull factors, the student is the agent, such that attractions or distractions lure them out of school. For example, I need to help out with my family at home financially. If I'm not working this part-time job, my family won't make it. We're not able to sustain ourselves. So the pull-out factor, the student is the agent, is the reason why we're saying, okay, I need to step, school cannot be a focus for me right now because of X, Y, and Z. Finally, with falling out factors, neither the student nor the school is the agent. Instead, it's circumstances. Circumstances exist that neither the school nor the student can remediate, and as a result, the connection that the students have with the school just gradually diminishes over time. The key difference between push-pull and falling out factors has to do with the agency. Although there seems to be a similarity between pull and falling out factors, in that both involved in an action of the students, the definitive difference is that the pull factors have a distinct object working as an attraction or distraction, whatever you want to call it, that is sought by the students, which leads to dropout. Whereas falling out factors lack that attraction or distraction. It just gradually occurs because I am no longer connected to what is going on. Any questions about that? Because the push, the pull, and the fallout, these are all factors that are concepts that I found to be very interesting when I first started delving into dropout and what it is, because there doesn't always seem to be an emphasis on what actual factors are involved beyond the 13 at risk. Thank you for that feedback. Yeah, it's not as though I wasn't aware of these factors, but the detail that I was able to get when really combing through more research really kind of floored me. I hadn't thought about it in these three kind of distinct categories before starting to do research on dropout. Okay, let's keep going. Overall, and I have a picture here of a cartoon that came out of the Washington Post writers group, and it talks about dropout factories, and we see here the dean or at the top saying, "Sure, we lose some, but who's counting?" And that is sad. I do want to I do want to remind us, for those of us who aren't as familiar with the actual research, the push-pull of fallout information, I do want to quickly just highlight, they did a lot of research with this in order to come up with these kind of categories. And one of the things that they found, like in their early studies, so basically between 1950s and the 80s, is that our students predominantly reported that the dropout factors were related to being pulled away. So if you think about what was occurring in our country during that time, and you think about the culture of the country during that time, it kind of did not surprise me. It actually occurred in the majority of the studies between the 50s and the 80s that they did, with the exception of the one he did like in 1972. And that did not survey students on pull factors like pregnancy and getting married. So they marked a trend of highly ranked pull factors, and this continued all the way through the early 80s. What was interesting, though, is by the time 1980s came around, the prevalence and the reporting of pull factors began to kind of drop off a little. There was more of that emphasis nationally when you're thinking about the U.S. Department of Education and trends in education nationally at that time, and making sure that our students were not quitting and joining the workforce to take care of their families because they were marrying at younger ages. Once we start to hit that mid to late 80s, because of what was going on just overall as a culture and a society in our country, it started to wane some. The pull factors of just started to kind of, it wasn't as strong, let me say that. Was also kind of interesting, though. They did continue the study, of course, annually, but in 1988, they found that many of the 8th to 10th grade students reported dropout factors as to being pushed out of school, whereas the 10th to 12th graders still reported pull-out factors. So those of us who are during that era who were 10th to 12th grade, we're still looking at it as though, hey, I still have to make sure that I can take care of my family, be it I'm a parent myself or I'm a part of a family wherein financial contributions that I make really matters. That automotive industry, depending on what region you were in, really was booming during that era. And it was just financially, a student could make more on working at some of the plants than they could going to college or going to other trade opportunities. Okay, so I want to talk to you about dropout factories and what this is and where it came from. Here's yet another illustration of what a dropout factory is perceived as. So what is a dropout factory? Well, I want to give you the actual straight definition for it. A dropout factory label refers to schools that have senior classes with 60% or fewer of the students who started there as freshmen. And this comes from Johns Hopkins University. And one of the individuals who's been there since the onset of this graduation nation collaboration between a variety of organizations, Robert Balfans. Somewhere along the way, these schools have lost at least 40% of the graduating class. And there are about 1,700 regular or vocational schools nationwide that fit that description. So basically about 12% of all schools. This data that was conducted by Johns Hopkins researchers, and if you have not checked out any of the information that they have, please do. I'll show you them as a reference at the very end of our time together, but they have some awesome information. They say that there are, like I said before, over 1,700 schools who are eligible for that dropout factory label. Something else that's kind of interesting to take a note of is that the data looks at senior classes for 3 years in a row to make sure that local events, like let's say a plant or automotive place closes, isn't to blame for the low retention rates. And the highest concentration of dropout factories is in large cities or in high poverty rural areas. Most of these schools that are known as dropout factories have extremely high minority populations. So let's delve into Texas. Let's find out what we have as far as our data is concerned. So according to the agency, and this kind of repeats some of the information I've hit on already, but I just wanted to reiterate it. Dropout rates differ based on the purpose of the measure, the definition of a dropout, and the availability and accuracy of the data and the time period covered. Texas calculates our dropout rates in two ways, the longitudinal dropout rate and then our annual dropout rate. We also calculate the attrition rate, which is not a dropout rate at all, but measures the difference between the number of students enrolled in grade 9 in fall of one school year with the number of students enrolled in grade 12 in the fall 3 years later. So here's our most current data. Annual dropout rates, and this is just summative, annual dropout rates by grade span for all student populations. Grade 7 through 8, we are at about a 0.3% dropout rate. Grades 9 through 12, we are looking at a dropout rate of 2.1%. Grades 7 through 12, this breaks it down even further. So let me show you on the next screen what these numbers actually mean. You may not be able to see that very well, so let me point out for you what this basically encompasses because this is data straight from the agency site. They break down the graduation rates and the grade span and dropouts of our students by group. So we're looking at, and this, you'll notice it says grades 7 through 8, which is 0.5% of a dropout rate for African American students. Grades 9 through 12 has a 3% dropout rate for African American students. And we're looking at grades 7 through 12, cumulatively, we have a 2.2% dropout rate for our African American students. Now, for those of us that may not be able to see this as well as I can, I want to point out to you as well that our African American population, as well as our Hispanic population, has the highest dropout rates in our state. If we look at American Indian, 0.4% grades 7 through 8, and what is this here? We have 2.8% when we're talking grades 9 through 12. Asian grades 7 through 8 is 0.2%. Hispanic 7 through 8, we're looking at 0.4%. Overall, grades 9 through 12, 2.5%. Pacific Islanders in there, about 0.4%. Multiracial, economically disadvantaged is in there as well, with a pretty high dropout rate of 2.5% when we're looking grades 9 through 12. So just trending overall, looking at the data, by far the dropout rate is the highest in grades 9 through 12, so high school. And as we noted earlier, there is a tendency for the dropout to start to occur end of freshman year to sophomore year. It's when historically and looking at data, we find that our students tend to drop out, unfortunately. Now, looking at male versus female, because we did point that out earlier as well, that there's a higher attrition rate or dropout rate. Let me not say attrition because we do know that those are two separate things, but there is a higher dropout rate for males than there are females. So looking at the very bottom of the screen here, it's going to be like the last 6 rows. Females grades 7 through 8 have a dropout rate of 0.3%, which is neck and neck with our males grades 7 through 8 at 0.3%. Looking at grades 9 through 12 female, we have 1.7%. Grades 9 through 12 male, 2.4%. And then we're looking at grades 7 through 12 female, 1.2%, and grades 7 through 12 male, 1.7%. So yet again, we see that dropout is the highest in high school. I'm going to show you annual dropout rates by program participation. So basically, who's considered at risk in language program. Let's have a look at this. At risk, we have 2.5% for kiddos in high school that drop out. Bilingual or English as a second language high school dropout rate, 3.7%. English language learner, just holistically, grades 9 through 12, 4.5%. We see here far smaller percentage of gifted and talented at high school with 0.2%. Immigrant high school dropout rate, 3.9%. Migrant high school dropout rate, 3.6%. Special education high school dropout rate, we have 2.9%. And those participating in Title I programs, so our traditionally underserved populations, through their grant funding, we see that 2.7% of students who participate in the Title I program have a dropout rate. So I want to start to go into closing pieces here, but one of the things I wanted to point out to you is House Bill 2804. If you are not already familiar with it, this is just kind of a, hey, this is on the horizon, and it's been on the horizon for a little while now. This actually goes into effect during the 2017-2018 school year, and we are in what is considered a transition year right now. So basically, in January, we will, as a state, all districts and campuses will get a score based on this system, based on the House Bill 2804, which goes into effect 17-18 school year. You'll notice that with this system that we have here, instead of going from indices, because we're currently in our last year of a 4 index or the indices system, we are now moving to domains. You'll also notice, if you're familiar with the current system that we have, that a lot of this information kind of stayed with us. So instead of index 1, which was student achievement, we have domain 1, which is student achievement. But we'll also notice there that in addition to STAR, which just in our index system, it was how did they do? Either they did it or they didn't. Did they pass or they did not? In our domain system, there is the college readiness standard that used to be primarily under index 4, which is now also in domain 1. Okay, so in essence, the domains we have now are kind of coming with us. We just have a couple of tweaks and a few additions added to it. So domain 1 is student achievement. Domain 2 is student progress. Domain 3 is closing performance gaps. Domain 4, post-secondary readiness. And domain 5, community and student engagement. One of the things you'll notice across the top is domains 1, 2, and 3 encompass 55% of the rating. Now, this is part of what is still going to be fleshed out, I would imagine, during our next legislative session, because we still have one more legislative session before this is supposed to be fully enacted across the state. And I would imagine during that time that we kind of divvy up what this 55% is, because the way it stands, it kind of makes me wonder, well, is domain 1 worth 45%? And then domains 2 and 3 are splitting that remaining 10%? Like, we don't know at this juncture. So that's part of some of the things that I'm sure they will clarify for us in the upcoming legislative sessions that we have. Part of the reason why I wanted to include this is because you'll notice in domain 4 that post-secondary readiness dropout is front and center where it says middle and junior high. So dropout, which has always been important, but maybe not having received as much emphasis in some districts or some campuses before, will definitely receive it now, because that is part of 25% of a district and high school rating. And in fact, districts and high school graduation rates directly impacts the elementary and middle schools. So we want our kiddos at that high school level to graduate, to not drop out, because if I'm out that elementary and middle school level, that graduation rate directly impacts my overall rating. And then we have domain 5, which is community and student engagement. And there are 3 indicators that a campus is allowed to select from that. And of course, we do have to select them prior to the end of the year. Like we have, as of now, you select those going into that 17-18 year before the school year even starts, so that you can know this is what I'm going to focus on. It's not allowing you to say, man, I knocked dropout out of the park this year, so I want to make sure that that's one of my domains under domain 5, one of the indicators that I'm actually assessed on. You have to select these prior to the school year beginning, prior to the school year starting. But if you're not familiar with this our new soon-to-be accountability system, I have this here because this is something that you definitely want to start to become familiar with. So I want to give you a little bit more information about the state of Texas and how we're doing and what we're doing as far as data is concerned from Joanna Fox, again, from Johns Hopkins University. Let's flip back over to that.
And they're either passing that anyway.
Give me one moment, because it appears that I've uploaded a different video. So give me one moment to give you a little bit more information about what we're doing in the state of Texas, and then we will go into our final closing because she does offer some really good insight in this state.
Started to look at the kids go to college and college, and that's for a year or two. There are databases that allow you to connect that. Well, students who get to it in college typically have 95% or better attendance. They don't have any behavioral, not very rapidly, only 2.3 percentage points since 2011. So that's setting a challenge in Texas. How can we increase our rate more rapidly and get more kids across that 90% threshold? That leads us to the next question. There are lots of differences still among subgroups of students. Although in Texas those differences are far smaller than in many other states. And here's a slide which is pretty, but probably difficult to read on the screen. It shows you the graduation rate by subgroup in Texas. And what you'll see is white students are doing far better than others. They're doing better than the national graduation rate. Hispanic students are doing 10 percentage points better than the national rate, although they're doing substantially less than the white students. Black students are also doing substantially better than the national black students. You can see that pretty much through all of these characteristics. Limited English proficiency, you're doing better, but the rates are much lower. Low-income students, again, nearly a 10 percentage point better or smaller gap in the country as a whole, and same with students with disabilities. But it means we still got gaps, and that's what we need to look at. How are we going to close them? When we look at the next slide, it simplifies the perspective and shows you the size of the gap. ELL students, still a big one. Special ed students, still a big gap. Low income, not so much in Texas. You're doing pretty well there. And the same with Hispanic students. And so what you want to be doing is think, okay, what are we doing right with our Hispanic students? What are we doing right with our low income students? How can we apply that for our ELL students? How can we apply it for our special ed students? So you've got a great bank of knowledge in this state about how to do well. The question becomes how to do this well for everybody. Then we can look at it from a different way. How many additional folks do we actually need to graduate to get to 90% by group? Because this enables you, if you look at it in your own district and school, to think, what strategies are we going to use? And I've been asking our researchers whether we can get this kind of data by district so that we can be helpful to you. Because once you start narrowing it down to a certain number of students, what you're doing is sending a message to the adults in your school and district that our improvement work is helpful. We have a certain number of kids we need to work with, and we can do it. That's a very important note for consultants. As we move on and look at what we can look at so far from the federal databases, again, these are not Texas databases, and there will be some difference. Although Texas reports all the numbers that they use, sometimes people then handle them in slightly different ways. And again, on the kind of doable note, what we see when we look at this slide is that there are 726 tickets, or 69% of them, that account for 31% of the non-graduates. And those are coming in districts which have high grad rates. The same is true with the grad rate of 153 districts, which have 89% graduation rate. You can see that it's not that, and this goes back, I think, to the question that the gentleman raised earlier. Many of your non-grad students come from districts with overall high graduation rate. Looks to me like it's about 76%, if I can, 74%, if I can read these tiny little figures, averaging, say, 80 to 89, 90 to 100. And that piece of it, that we're not just looking at a single low-performing school here and there. We are looking in our high-performing suburban schools, urban schools, rural schools, everybody, to look at the kids who are getting left behind in the midst of many students who are thriving.
Okay, that's all I wanted to show you from the virtual dropout conference keynote that we had. I do highly encourage you to check out the site. So if there's more information, if you're wanting to see her entire session, plus the other sessions that were offered on that day, you can definitely do so. I'm going to show you a couple of resources now as I go into closing. The next time we have our webinar together is going to be on October 3rd, and the topic is Danger, Will Robinson, Early Warning Signs. Please feel free to register for any of those, and I look forward to seeing you at those later dates as well. Here are some of the places that I received quite a bit of information for our session today. Johns Hopkins, of course, School of Education, the Texas Education Agency, the National Dropout Prevention Center Network at Clemson University, and then NCSCT, which is one of our national organizations as well, along with ETS. If you have any other questions, if you would like to learn more about some of the dropout initiatives that we are offering here, please feel free to contact me directly via the website, which is region10.org/dropout, through the phone or through email. And my email is just my name, lauren.mckinney@region10.org. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you joining me today for Identification, Prevention, Recovery, our webinar series, tackling dropout and having dropout discussions during this 2016-2017 school year. I hope that you have a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you. Bye.